Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said Wagner mercenary group head Yevgeny Prigozhin has rejected an offer to his fighters to serve as a unit in Russia's army. He told local media that many group commanders had backed the plan to be led by a senior Wagner figure during recent talks in Moscow. And according to him, Prigozhin's reply was, "The guys do not agree with this decision." The talks were held just days after Wagner's aborted mutiny on the 23rd to 24th of June that challenged Mr. Putin's authority. Under the deal that ended the short-lived rebellion, the mercenaries were told they could join the regular Russian army or head to Belarus, a close ally of Russia. Wagner has fought some of the bloodiest battles since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. However, the US military now assesses that the group is no longer participating in any significant capacity in support of combat operations in Ukraine. The comments were made Thursday by Pentagon spokesman Pat Ryder, who also said that the majority of Wagner fighters were believed to still be in areas of Russian-occupied Ukraine. In the meantime, US President Joe Biden said the United States is unsure where Prigozhin is, but quipped that the Wagner mercenary chief could be imprisoned, or rather poisoned now. Mr. Biden remarked during a visit to Finland to welcome it as NATO's latest member. The current whereabouts of Prigozhin, a former Putin loyalist, are unknown. Mr. Biden was in Helsinki to participate in the summit with the leaders of Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland and Norway. He came directly from this week's NATO summit held in Vilnius, Lithuania, where he said Russia's invasion of Ukraine had only made the alliance stronger.
Determining what happens to Prigozhin, what happens to Vilnius, what happens when we discuss this in Vilnius is God only knows what he's likely to do. Well, I'm not even sure, we're not even sure where he is and what relationship he has. If I were he, I'd be careful what I ate. I'd be keeping my eye on my menu. But all kidding aside, who knows? I don't know. I don't think any of us know for certain what the future of Prigozhin is in Russia. And so I don't know how to answer that question beyond that.
US President Joe Biden. And speaking of a stronger NATO alliance, China is calling the organization a real troublemaker. A Chinese envoy addressing the UN Security Council denounced the Vilnius communique, which was released at the NATO summit in Lithuania, for being steeped in Cold War mentality and ideological bias. Zhang Jun, China's permanent representative to the United Nations, said that the lengthy and tedious communique repeated old tunes, ignoring basic facts and making unwarranted attacks and accusations against China, which is complete hypocrisy. Mr. Zhang also accused the Intergovernmental Military Alliance of being a significant source of trouble and instability. Joining us right now for more is security analyst David Otto. Hi, David. Welcome to the program. What are your thoughts on Putin's comments on Wagner, saying that the group simply does not exist?
Millicent, this is not new. The only time when Vladimir Putin has acknowledged, or the Russian government has acknowledged Wagner, has been during its spectacular antics in Bakhmut, when he overtook the city. Previously, Russia has always denied, President Putin has always denied that there is any group that exists such as Wagner. Legally, the Duma, which is the Russian parliament, has not, legally approved any private military contractors. So within the legal space, Wagner doesn't exist. But remember, Putin said also that the group exists as a group, but it doesn't exist as a legal entity. So this is, not unusual. But as we know, Wagner has been around since 2014 when he did, fight along pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. It has, been around during the war in Syria. It has also been around, as you know, in countries like Central African Republic, in Mozambique, but also in the Middle East, as I mentioned earlier on, fighting alongside Bashar al-Assad, who is the president of Syria. So it's not strange that Putin would say they don't legally exist, because, they are not recognized, legally in Russia.
It's also interesting, how one, thinks about all of this, the sudden change in tone on the group from President Putin, who's known to be a quite very strict and stern leader. But then you have another comment from the United States saying perhaps he's been poisoned.
Yes, I mean, the issue has been that, nobody really knows what is going on in the background. I mean, I listened to the president of the United States saying that, they don't know the whereabouts of Prigozhin. But of course, no one is looking for him. We know that, Prigozhin on the 29th of June, days just after the so-called attempted coup by the West and the mutiny, as Russia decides to call it, or a treasonable offense, he was meeting alongside about 35 other Wagner commanders. They met with Vladimir Putin. So we don't know what is actually going on. But what we know is that there has been disagreement, between the Wagner forces and the Russian regular forces on ground in terms of operation and leadership. That's what we know thus far. But what happens after that is something that is quite hidden from the world. So it's all speculations, and I know that the West has a right to make these speculations because, of course, it stokes the fire in terms of, bringing some kind of friction, between Wagner and the Russian government. But let's see how it goes.
Indeed. So with all of this happening, what impact do you think this could have? And this is in areas, especially in Africa, where the Wagner Group is known to be operational.
Yeah, I didn't quite catch what you said, but, do you want to repeat that? Over?
Yes, talking about the role the Wagner Group plays, what impact do you think this could have with, the role that they're playing in some of the countries where they're known to be fighting, talking about the continent of Africa?
Well, first of all, in terms of the impact of Wagner Group, the Russian president has made it very clear that what is going to happen is those who want to continue fighting under Wagner will have to have a new contract, and join under the Ministry of Defense. And this is something which Prigozhin himself has disagreed. He doesn't want his Wagner forces to be integrated within the Ministry of Defense because he believes very strongly that the Ministry of Defense is not a competent force. But of course, the spokesman for the government, Dmitry Peskov, made it clear that during the meeting recently with Vladimir Putin, with Wagner forces and commanders, there was a suggestion that, one of Wagner's top commanders, known as Grey Hair, should be leading the forces in Ukraine. But that suggestion was turned down. So we don't know. But all we know is that Prigozhin is very close to Putin because we all expected him to be in Belarus, on some kind of an exile. But all of a sudden he was in Kremlin or perhaps in St. Petersburg having a meeting with Vladimir Putin. In terms of the impact in Africa, I don't think there will be much, concern about that because Wagner operates in cells. It does have commanders who control these cells in different African countries, Central African Republic, Mali, Mozambique, perhaps, as some say, in Sudan. So I don't think there will be an impact on that part because these are paid, mercenaries that are paid, and even if they move from one country to another or they change their commanders, they will still continue as it is. So I don't think there's going to be any impact, from an African perspective.
And perhaps still on this, we have China calling the NATO alliance a real troublemaker. What were your thoughts when you heard that?
Well, this is, China's position, geopolitics in such a way that, countries like China would have, their opinions, but, that again remains totally an opinion. But what we know is that, this war in Ukraine, is going to drag for long. We understand that, of course, with the recent meeting that was held by NATO in Lithuania, Ukraine was refused membership and given a timeless program. So that would be an issue. But of course, it is in the advantage of the United States for this war to drag on for long, and it's an advantage for NATO because, of course, it drags Russia into a very long war, which its economy will not be able to support. But where that keeps Ukraine is something that one does not want to desire, because, of course, Russia will also not give up, especially with the new membership of Sweden, being talked about, after the approval from Turkey. But again, back to your question, China, can say whatever it likes to say and make its opinion, but the facts, are there in terms of what the situation is right now. And I think, in terms of future prognostics, I think what we're looking forward to is for this war to end, because, everyone is in deep trouble, as a result of this war.
Were you surprised when we heard about, I think, General Popov, the Russian general who is stationed in Ukraine, that spoke about the front lines, and then we heard that he was sacked? One wonders with that action what Russia is planning and the true situation of, the army, talking about Russia's army on the front lines there in Ukraine, and how this impacts this war between both countries.
I think there's an issue of morale that could be impacted. This general was sacked, for making this pronouncement. But this is the same, pronouncement that the boss of Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin, made, and this is what led to the mutiny. He had complained very bitterly that there were lack of, supplies of weapons. Weapons were supplied not on time. The kind of quantities that were supplied were not good enough. And this led to a lot of casualties, on the side of Russia. I'm sure that Vladimir Putin would, look into this, but heads have to roll. What Vladimir Putin doesn't want to demonstrate or want to show to the world is that there are any weaknesses, within the Russian front. So if a general comes up and says that these weaknesses does exist, it puts Vladimir Putin, the president, in a very difficult position, but to relieve that general. And this is the same reason why Putin has made it very clear that there will be a change of operational command. The Russian regular forces will now take over from the Wagner forces, because he doesn't want to give power to Prigozhin and then expose some of the weaknesses in the front line. This gives a lot of ammunition, not just to Ukraine, but to NATO forces and NATO to pump out this propaganda. And Putin doesn't want this.
Indeed, we'll continue to watch the events as they unfold. We'd like to appreciate your time, David Otto, security analyst. Many thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
In the meantime, Ukrainian soldiers have fired anti-tank grenade launchers at Russian positions near Soledar as the country's offensive continues. The fire was adjusted with the help of a drone observing the work of Iranian unit. According to Ukrainian soldiers, the mission of the unit was to hold the positions and not let the Russians accumulate their forces. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is urging Russian President Vladimir Putin to prolong a deal allowing the Black Sea export of Ukraine grain, saying the consequence of not doing so would be global food insecurity. Ms. von der Leyen says the ball is now in Russia's court with the whole world watching. She told a press conference alongside UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Efforts to prolong the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The world needs it. Russia has a responsibility to prolong it. Otherwise, global food insecurity will be the consequence. So now the ball is in President Putin's court, and the world is watching.
And with the Black Sea export deal now hanging by a thread, Ukrainian grain exporting giant Nibulon has found a way to weather the war's storm. Before he was killed in a Russian missile strike last July, CEO Alexei Vandertursky decided the company would build up an export route via the Danube River that would be more secure than precarious wartime sea exports. 16 months into a war that has devastated the firm he founded, his son and successor, Andrei, says that the decision is one reason Nebulon is not bankrupt. The Danube has become their main export route, channeling 190,000 tons of grain per month from a standing start when Russia invaded in February 2022, blockading vital sea exports. The company is now Ukraine's third or fourth top exporter. If the Black Sea deal ends on July 17th, Nibulon would benefit in the short term, but it would drive up the price of logistics and transport for farmers and in turn hammer Ukrainian production.
My father decided to invest into alternative way. He went across the border with different countries and saw the possibility to invest in on the so-called solidarity lines today on the Danube River as an alternative, because we didn't believe we stopped trading with Russia in 2008 because of the mentality, because they do not keep their words. Yeah, that's in their DNA. Yeah, so if you sign the deal, they change the deal, the conditions every day. Yeah, so it's not sustainable. So it's better not to have the relations with them. And now we are finishing the construction of the third berth. So planning to export up to 250,000 tons. Today, it's you can, if you look at the total export, for example, what Nibulon did last marketing year, 2,350,000, and 1.2 million tons were done via Ismail. Yeah, so that's a snapshot picture. So you can say 50% and 50%. But currently, for the last couple of months, the share is around 70%, 80%, and the less efficiency on the grain corridor, the more investments done in Ismail on the Danube, so the share is going up in favor of Danube transportation.
And the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who was detained in Russia, is marking 100 days in custody. During an event to talk about the case, his sister described him as brave in the face of charges allegedly collecting military secrets in the Ural city of Yekaterinburg. Daniel Gershkovich spoke of her brother's demeanor and praised his bravery. The United States says he was wrongfully detained and is demanding his release, even as it seems President Joe Biden is serious about pursuing a prisoner exchange for him.
Are deeply involved in this case.
But yeah, I'd love to do one of my mom started a tradition to do these family vacations, just insisted that anytime you come home, we have a vacation all together. So I'd love to do that. And my dad's going to bring the whole grocery store with him. And he and Evan will cook up an amazing dinner, and I'd love to have a beer with them. But we're just trying to, learn everything that we can, and just try to mostly stay strong, try to keep the spotlight on Evan's case.